There is a kind of knowledge that, if revealed too quickly, would shatter the way you understand justice, mercy, and even faith itself. It is knowledge that does not come through study, memorization, or debate. It does not arrive through years of effort or public teaching. It arrives silently, placed by Allah into the heart of a servant, carrying wisdom that cannot be explained until its time unfolds. This is the knowledge hinted at in the Quran, a knowledge so subtle and dangerous to misunderstand that it is only shown through a story, never fully defined, never opened to everyone. Before we go deeper into this mystery, thank you for watching Islamic Insight channel. From which country are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments, and if you love learning about Islam, subscribe to this channel so you never miss content like this. What you're about to hear is not a tale of fantasy or philosophy, but a Quranic reality that forces the soul to confront how little it truly sees, even when it thinks it understands everything. There are different levels of knowledge in Islam, and the Quran makes this distinction without ever turning it into a hierarchy of pride. There is knowledge of law, knowledge of belief, knowledge of right and wrong, and then there is a form of knowledge that does not function like instruction at all. It is not meant to guide the masses, establish rules, or be taught from one generation to another. It is knowledge that explains why Allah allows certain things to happen the way they do. Not in theory, but in exact moments, to exact people, for exact reasons. Later, scholars would call this knowledge ilm ladunni, meaning knowledge that comes directly from Allah without any intermediary. The Quran describes it carefully as mercy first, then knowledge, as if to warn that without mercy, this knowledge would be unbearable. It is not something a person claims, chases, or proves. It is something Allah gives, and only to whom He wills. The danger of this knowledge is not in its source, but in how humans react to it. Human beings are wired to judge based on what they see immediately. We measure justice by outcomes, fairness by appearances, and wisdom by explanations we can grasp. But Allah's wisdom does not operate on a single moment or a single life. It spans generations, unseen futures, and realities hidden behind the veil of the unseen. This is why the Quran does not introduce ilm ladunni through a lecture or a command, but through a story that deliberately unsettles the heart. A story where the one learning is not an ordinary believer, not a scholar, but a prophet among the greatest messengers of Allah. Prophet Musa, peace be upon him, was not only a messenger, but one who spoke directly to Allah. He carried revelation, law, miracles, and leadership. His life was filled with confrontations against tyranny, moments of divine intervention, and a mission that shaped an entire nation. Yet despite his status, despite his closeness to Allah, he was about to be shown something that would humble him in a way no enemy ever could. In an authentic narration, Musa was once asked a simple question, one that many people would answer without hesitation. Who is the most knowledgeable person on earth? Musa answered based on what he knew and what he had been entrusted with. He answered that he was. There was no arrogance in intention, but the answer itself carried a subtle human limitation. Knowledge measured only by what has been given to you. Allah corrected Musa immediately, not publicly, not harshly, but decisively. Allah revealed to him that there was a servant from among his servants who possessed knowledge Musa did not have. This moment is critical because it establishes a principle that echoes throughout Islamic belief. No matter how high your rank, no matter how close you are to Allah, knowledge still belongs to Allah alone. What He gives to one, He may withhold from another, not as a judgment of worth, but as part of divine wisdom. Musa was not diminished by this correction. He was elevated by how he responded to it. Instead of questioning, resisting, or defending his status, Musa asked one question, and it was the question of a true seeker. How can I reach Him? Allah did not make the path easy. The location was obscure. described only as the junction of two seas. There was no name, no map, no clear landmark. Musa was told to carry a fish, and when the fish disappeared in an extraordinary way, that would be the sign. This was not just a physical journey. It was a journey designed to strip away certainty, comfort, and expectation. Musa set out with his young companion, Yusha ibn Nun, and together they traveled without knowing how long the journey would take or what awaited them at the end. The Quran describes the fatigue, the hunger, and the human forgetfulness that occurred along the way. At one point, they rested by a rock, and the fish miraculously slipped away into the sea. Yusha forgot to inform Musa immediately, and they continued walking, growing more exhausted with every step. This detail is not accidental. Even in a journey guided by Allah, human weakness remains. Fatigue clouds awareness, hunger dulls memory, and signs can be missed even when they are right in front of us. When Musa finally learned what had happened, he did not react with frustration or blame. He immediately recognized that this was the sign Allah had promised. This was the place destiny had been leading them toward. When Musa returned to that spot, he encountered a man unlike anyone he had met before. The Quran does not describe his appearance in detail, it describes his status. A servant granted mercy from Allah and taught knowledge directly by him. No lineage is mentioned. No title is given. His value is defined entirely by what Allah gave him. This man is known in authentic tradition as Khidir. The meeting between Musa and Khidir is not the meeting of a teacher and a student in the usual sense. It is the meeting of two different forms of divine assignment. Musa represents revealed law, clarity, and guidance for society. Khidir represents hidden wisdom, unseen outcomes, and divine decisions that operate behind the curtain of events. Musa approached Khidir with humility that should silence every heart that associates knowledge with pride. He did not demand, debate, or assert his rank. He asked permission to follow him, hoping to learn something from what Allah had taught him. This moment alone carries a lesson deep enough for a lifetime. A prophet asking to learn from a servant. Knowledge lowering the one who seeks it rather than elevating him above others. Khidir responded with a warning, not out of arrogance, but honesty. He told Musa that he would not be able to remain patient, not because Musa lacked faith, but because the nature of this knowledge clashes with the instincts of justice Allah himself placed in the human heart. Khidir explained that Musa would see things he could not understand, things that would provoke immediate objection. Musa assured him of patience, promising not to disobey or question. Khidir then set a condition that defined everything that followed. Musa was not to ask about anything until Khidir chose to explain it. This condition was not about control. It was about timing. Divine wisdom cannot be judged mid-action. It can only be understood once its outcome is revealed. With this agreement, the journey of hidden knowledge began, not with lectures or miracles, but with actions that would shake Musa to his core and leave every listener questioning how much they truly understand about the world around them. What unfolded next was not a lesson delivered through words, but through presence, silence, and actions that seemed to cut directly against everything Musa had been sent to uphold. From the moment Musa began walking alongside this servant of Allah, the balance of the relationship was already clear. Musa was the seeker now, and Khidir was the one carrying a burden of knowledge that was never meant to be comfortable. Khidir did not present himself as a teacher standing above a student. He did not explain his status, defend his authority, or invite admiration. He simply moved forward as if time itself had already shown him what was coming, while Musa walked behind him with the weight of expectation and restraint pressing harder with every step. This was the first real test, not of obedience, but of patience in the face of uncertainty. For a man who had spent his life confronting falsehood openly, calling people to clarity, and challenging injustice directly, this silence was already a trial. Khidir reminded Musa once more of the condition that he would not ask questions no matter how strange the actions appeared. Musa agreed again with sincerity. He believed patience was within his grasp, because patience in hardship was something he knew well. What he did not yet understand was that this was a different kind of patience, not patience in suffering, but patience in watching actions that looked wrong and being unable to stop them. This distinction matters deeply. Many people can endure pain when they understand its cause. Far fewer can endure confusion when their moral compass is being tested in real time. Khidir was not asking Musa to endure hunger or fear. He was asking him to suspend judgment, something far more difficult for a prophet entrusted with divine law. They soon came upon a ship belonging to poor fishermen. These were not powerful men or wealthy traders. They were people whose entire livelihood depended on that vessel, people who earned their sustenance day by day upon the sea. When they recognized Musa and his companion, they allowed them aboard without asking for payment. This detail is important because it establishes the goodness of these people. They were generous, trusting, and vulnerable. There was no hint of wrongdoing on their part. As the ship moved across the water, nothing seemed unusual. Then, without warning, Khidir damaged the ship. He caused a defect, something that would make it visibly flawed and functionally compromised. To Musa, this was not a small act. This was an attack on the livelihood of innocent people who had shown kindness. Musa reacted instinctively. His heart could not accept what his eyes had just witnessed. How could someone cause harm to people who had done nothing but good? How could injustice be committed under the banner of divine knowledge? Musa spoke out, questioning the act, expressing shock and moral outrage. His response was not rooted in ego or impatience. It was rooted in everything he had been commanded to stand for. Protect the weak. Do not wrong the innocent. Do not repay kindness with harm. In that moment, Musa was being fully himself, a prophet shaped by revelation and moral clarity. Khidir did not argue. He did not explain. He did not soften the act or justify it. He simply reminded Musa of the agreement. This silence was deliberate. If Khidir had explained the reason immediately, the lesson would have been lost. Ilm Ladunni is not about seeing wisdom instantly. It is about trusting Allah when wisdom is hidden. Musa acknowledged his mistake and promised again to restrain himself. But the seed of tension had been planted. The journey was no longer theoretical. It had crossed into moral territory that Musa could not ignore. As they continued, the weight of that moment lingered. Musa walked knowing he had failed his first test, yet still hoping he could endure what came next. What followed was far more severe. They encountered a young boy, still early in life, not described as sinful, violent, or corrupt in appearance. There was no warning, no sign of danger. Then Khidir took the life of the child. The Quran presents this moment with stark clarity, without poetic cushioning. A life was taken. Innocence, as it appeared to human eyes, was extinguished. For Musa, this crossed every boundary. This was not damage to property. This was the taking of a human soul. Musa could not remain silent. No prophet sent to uphold justice could witness such an act and say nothing. His reaction was immediate and forceful. He condemned the act as grave wrongdoing. He reminded Khidir that taking a life without justification was among the most severe transgressions. This was not merely a breach of patience. This was a collision between two forms of divine interaction with the world. Musa was operating within the law Allah revealed to govern human society. Khidir was acting upon direct instruction from Allah concerning unseen outcomes. Musa did not know this yet. All he saw was an action that appeared to violate the very foundation of justice. Once again, Khidir responded not with explanation, but with restraint. He reminded Musa that he had warned him from the beginning. This knowledge would not align with Musa's perspective. This was not a failure of faith. It was a limitation of human perception. Musa, realizing that he had broken the condition again, pleaded to be allowed to continue. He acknowledged his inability to remain silent and asked for one final chance. This moment is deeply human, a prophet recognizing his own limits, not turning away in pride, but asking humbly to keep learning despite the pain of not understanding. Khidir agreed, but with a clear boundary. One more objection would end the journey. They moved forward again, the tension now heavy and unmistakable. The lessons were no longer subtle. Musa had witnessed actions that contradicted his understanding of mercy and justice. Yet he was still being asked to trust that Allah was behind them. This is the point where many hearts would turn away. Yet Musa stayed, walking forward with questions burning inside him, carrying the weight of silence like a physical burden. They eventually arrived at a town whose people were openly hostile. They refused hospitality, denied food, and showed no basic kindness. In a society where hospitality was a sacred value, this rejection was deliberate and humiliating. Despite this, Khidir noticed a wall that was on the verge of collapse. Without being asked, without expecting reward, he repaired it. Musa watched in disbelief. After what he had already seen, this act confused him in a different way. Why help people who showed cruelty? Why offer effort and care to those who refused even the minimum of decency? This time, Musa spoke not out of outrage, but confusion. He suggested that at least payment could have been requested. This was not a moral condemnation, it was a practical question, yet even this broke the condition. Khidir stopped. The journey was over. The patience required had exceeded its limit. Musa had reached the edge of what he was capable of enduring without explanation. Only now, after the actions were complete, after the tension had reached its peak, did Khidir begin to explain. This order is everything. The explanations were never meant to come first. They were meant to come only after the heart had been tested. Khidir revealed that the ship had been damaged intentionally to save it. A tyrannical king was seizing every sound ship by force. By creating a visible defect, the vessel was spared, allowing the poor fishermen to keep their livelihood. What Musa saw as harm was, in reality, protection disguised as loss. Then came the explanation that shakes the soul. The child, Khidir explained, would have grown into a source of disbelief and oppression for his righteous parents. Allah, in His mercy, chose to take the child early and replace him with one more pure and compassionate. This was not punishment. It was mercy spread across lifetimes, a mercy that human eyes could never see at the moment it was enacted. The wall belonged to two orphaned boys whose father was righteous. Beneath it was a treasure meant for them when they matured. By repairing the wall, Khidir ensured their inheritance would remain hidden and protected until the right time. Khidir ended by stating something that defines the entire story. He said that none of these actions were done by his own will. Every act was commanded by Allah. This was not personal insight or intuition. It was revelation for a specific purpose at a specific time. With that, the paths of Musa and Khidir separated. Musa returned to his mission, carrying a lesson that was never meant to be taught openly, only remembered quietly. The lesson that Allah's wisdom is always complete, even when human understanding is not, and that some truths are not revealed to be acted upon, but to deepen trust in the one who sees what we never can. After the paths of Musa and Khidir separated, the weight of what had occurred did not simply fade into memory. This was not an encounter meant to end with understanding alone. It was meant to leave an echo, something that would follow Musa and, through revelation, follow every believer who would later hear this story. The explanations Khidir gave did not erase the shock of the actions themselves. They reframed them. And that distinction is critical. The Quran does not tell this story to make people comfortable with hardship or to encourage passive acceptance of injustice. It tells this story to realign the human heart with a truth it constantly forgets, that Allah's wisdom is not confined to what the eyes can see or the mind can immediately process. When Musa heard the explanations, he understood the logic behind each act, but more importantly, he understood his own limitation. This was not a failure. It was a necessary humbling. Musa was a prophet sent with clear law, clear commands, and a mission that required decisiveness and moral clarity. His role demanded that he object to wrongdoing, confront tyranny, and protect life and dignity. Nothing in this encounter changed that responsibility. What changed was his awareness that Allah operates on layers beyond the visible world, layers that are not meant to be navigated by human judgment. Musa did not return from this journey doubting justice. He returned understanding that justice unfolds across time in ways humans cannot map in a single moment. This is where many people misunderstand the story. They imagine that the lesson is to stop questioning hardship, to silence moral concern, or to accept suffering without reflection. That is not the message of Islam. Musa was not criticized for caring about the fisherman, the child, or the principles of justice. His objections were not condemned as sinful. They were expected. Khidir himself warned that Musa would not be able to remain patient, not because Musa lacked faith, but because faith combined with moral responsibility creates tension when wisdom is hidden. The Quran preserves Musa's objections to teach believers that reacting to apparent injustice is human, even prophetic. The lesson is not to suppress that reaction, but to understand that reaction does not give access to the full picture. Khidir's final words carry enormous weight. He clarified that none of his actions came from personal desire or independent reasoning. He was not exercising free judgment. He was executing commands revealed to him by Allah. This distinction protects the entire structure of Islamic belief. It closes the door to anyone claiming secret knowledge to justify harm, cruelty, or lawlessness. Ilm Ladunni is not transferable, not repeatable, and not accessible through spiritual effort or personal purity. It is revelation, limited, controlled, and bound entirely by Allah's will. When Khidir's role ended, that specific manifestation of hidden knowledge ended with it. The Quran does not open this door again. It closes it deliberately. For believers, this creates a necessary balance. On one side, Islam commands action, justice, compassion, and accountability. On the other side, it teaches surrender to divine decree when outcomes do not align with expectation. The story of Musa and Khidir sits precisely at that intersection. It does not remove responsibility. It deepens humility. It teaches that Allah's mercy may arrive wrapped in loss, that protection may come disguised as damage, and that what breaks the heart today may save the soul tomorrow. These are not ideas meant to justify oppression or silence the wronged. They are meant to sustain faith when answers do not arrive on human timelines. The Quran does not tell us how Musa felt emotionally after this encounter, but the silence itself speaks volumes. Some lessons do not need emotional commentary. They settle quietly, reshaping the way a believer interprets events. Musa returned to his people with strengthened resolve, not weakened conviction. He did not become passive or detached. He continued confronting injustice and guiding his people according to revelation. The difference was internal. He now carried the certainty that Allah's plan is never chaotic, even when it appears harsh. That certainty is not intellectual comfort. It is spiritual grounding. This grounding is what the story offers to every believer who feels shaken by unanswered questions. When a child dies young, when kindness is met with loss, when evil seems to flourish unchecked, the human heart demands explanation. Islam does not dismiss that demand. It acknowledges it through Musa's voice, but it also teaches that not every explanation is given in this world. Some wisdom remains hidden, not because Allah is distant, but because the human heart would not survive knowing everything. Mercy is sometimes found in not knowing. The encounter between Musa and Khidir also clarifies something crucial about spiritual rank. Knowledge does not always mean authority, and authority does not always mean access to every form of knowledge. Musa remained superior in mission and responsibility. Khidir's knowledge did not elevate him above Musa in guidance for humanity. It simply served a different divine purpose. This protects the believer from confusing mystical knowledge with moral leadership. Islam is built on clarity, revelation, and accountability, not secret paths or hidden hierarchies. As the story transitions forward, the focus shifts from the actions themselves to their implications for faith. The Quran embeds this narrative in a larger framework of belief in the unseen. Believing in Allah does not only mean believing He exists. It means trusting His wisdom when it contradicts personal logic, emotional instinct, and immediate perception. This trust is not blind. It is informed by revelation, history, and the repeated promise that Allah is never unjust. The story of Musa and Khidir does not ask believers to understand everything. It asks them to trust the one who does. This trust becomes especially important in moments when life seems to fracture without explanation. When effort does not lead to reward, when loss arrives uninvited, when prayers appear unanswered. The believer is not asked to celebrate these moments or pretend they do not hurt. They are asked to remember that the story is still unfolding. Just as the damaged ship was spared, just as the orphaned treasure was protected, just as mercy was written into an event that looked like tragedy, Allah's decree continues to move toward outcomes hidden from present sight. The Quran leaves this portion of the story without further detail intentionally. There is no reunion, no continuation, no further lessons from Khidir. The mystery remains intact. This is not a gap in the narrative. It is the narrative. Some truths are meant to be known only to the extent that they strengthen trust, not curiosity. The story ends where it needs to end, leaving the believer with questions that are not meant to be answered, but carried. And in carrying them, something changes. The believer begins to see life less as a series of isolated events and more as a woven decree. Pain does not disappear. Loss does not suddenly make sense, but despair loses its grip. Arrogance softens, judgment slows, faith deepens. This is the quiet impact of ilm ladunni on those who never possess it. It teaches not how to see the unseen, but how to trust the one who governs it completely. When the explanations were finally given, they did more than clarify past actions. They reframed the entire meaning of causality itself. The veil was not lifted so that Musa could approve of what he had seen, but so that he could understand the limits of human judgment when it stands before divine decree. Each explanation carried a precision that revealed how Allah's wisdom moves ahead of time, not reacting to events, but shaping them before they unfold. The damaged ship was not an act of destruction, but a preemptive mercy, calibrated exactly to the level required to protect its owners without ruining them. Too much damage would have sunk it. Too little would have left it vulnerable to seizure. The balance itself points to knowledge beyond human planning. The explanation was not poetic or symbolic. It was practical, strategic, and exact, reminding the believer that Allah's mercy is not always soft in appearance, but it is always precise in outcome. The explanation of the child is the most difficult, and the Quran does not shy away from that difficulty. It does not soften the language or redirect attention. It confronts the heart directly. A life was taken not because of what the child had done, but because of what the child would become and how that future would harm others. This challenges the human tendency to judge only by the present moment. Human justice reacts to what has occurred. Divine justice also accounts for what will occur. Allah's knowledge encompasses outcomes, paths not taken, futures unseen, and consequences that ripple across lives. The mercy in this act was not isolated to the child alone, but extended to the parents, their faith, their emotional survival, and the unseen child who would replace him, one who would bring them comfort instead of pain. This is not a lesson meant to be reenacted. It is a truth meant to be contemplated with humility. The wall stands as a quieter symbol, yet no less profound. Two orphans, unknown, unnoticed, living in a town that showed no compassion, were still under the protection of Allah because of the righteousness of their father. His goodness had not vanished with his death. It continued to shield his children in ways they could not perceive. The wall did not announce its purpose. It did not glow or reveal the treasure beneath it. It simply stood, repaired by someone the orphans would never meet, ensuring their future without their awareness. This is how divine care often operates, silently preserving what matters most while the world remains unaware. The explanation of the wall teaches that Allah's justice is not always loud, not always immediate, and not always visible. Sometimes it waits, hidden beneath ordinary structures until the appointed time arrives. Together, these explanations form a pattern. They reveal that what humans often label as chaos is, in reality, order they cannot yet read. They show that events are not isolated incidents, but connected pieces of a larger design. Loss is sometimes prevention. Absence is sometimes protection. Delay is sometimes preparation. None of this denies pain or invalidates grief. Islam never demands emotional numbness. What it offers instead is context, a framework that allows pain to exist without destroying faith. Musa did not leave this encounter emotionally untouched. He left with a deeper understanding of his role and the boundaries of his mission. He was not meant to act upon hidden knowledge. He was meant to guide according to what Allah revealed publicly and clearly. This distinction leads directly into the deeper meaning of ilm Ladunni itself. It is not mystical insight available through effort, purification, or spiritual exercises. It is not a hidden curriculum waiting to be unlocked. It is not an alternative path to truth. It is revelation given for specific actions, to specific individuals, at specific moments, and withdrawn once its purpose is fulfilled. Khidir did not possess this knowledge as a permanent status. He was entrusted with it as a responsibility. The moment his task ended, the knowledge ceased to function publicly. This protects Islam from spiritual elitism and false claims. No one inherits Khidir's role. No one repeats his actions. No one uses his story as justification to bypass law, ethics, or accountability. The Quran reinforces this protection by ending the story without transition. There is no lingering mystery offered for speculation. Khidir states clearly that he acted only by Allah's command. That statement closes the door to interpretation that could be misused. It reminds the believer that knowledge without permission is not wisdom, and action without command is not obedience. Ilm Ladunni does not compete with revelation. It serves it briefly, quietly, and then disappears. Revelation remains the foundation, accessible, preserved, and sufficient for guidance until the end of time. This understanding reshapes how believers interpret spiritual claims. Islam does not deny that Allah grants insight, intuition, and wisdom to His servants. But it draws a firm line between personal inspiration and divine command. Personal insight cannot override law. Inner feeling cannot cancel moral responsibility. The story of Musa and Khidir does not elevate the hidden over the clear. It places the hidden exactly where it belongs, behind the clear, supporting it without ever replacing it. Musa remained the prophet sent to guide nations. Khidir did not follow Musa because his role was never meant for public leadership. Each served Allah within a defined boundary, and within those boundaries, harmony existed. The story also answers a question many believers struggle with but rarely articulate. Why does Allah not explain everything as it happens? Why does wisdom arrive late, if at all? The answer lies in the nature of faith itself. Faith is not built on constant explanation. It is built on trust, informed by revelation. If every hardship came with immediate clarity, faith would be transactional rather than devotional. The believer would trust only when understanding arrived. Islam teaches something deeper. It teaches trust before understanding, patience before clarity, and surrender before resolution. In this way, the story of Ilm Ladunni becomes a mercy rather than a burden. It tells the believer that it is not their failure when they do not understand why something happened. It is not a weakness to ask questions internally, to struggle, to feel confusion. Musa did all of that, and the Quran preserved it with honor. What matters is where the struggle leads. Does it lead to bitterness or to humility? Does it lead to accusation or to trust? Does it harden the heart or soften it? The knowledge shown through Khidir does not promise answers in this world. It promises that answers exist, whether or not they are revealed. That promise alone is enough to stabilize a heart in times of loss, injustice, or delay. It allows the believer to say with sincerity that Allah knows what they do not, and that His mercy is active even when it feels absent. This is not passive faith. It is resilient faith. Faith that continues to act righteously, oppose injustice, and pursue good, while accepting that the full story belongs to Allah alone. And so the lesson of Ilm Ladunni does not end with knowledge gained, but with humility earned. It leaves the believer standing between action and surrender, between responsibility and trust, aware that life is not random, suffering is not wasted, and divine wisdom is never reckless. It remains unseen, not to distance the believer from Allah, but to draw them closer through trust. What remains after the story is not a list of conclusions, but a shift in how life itself is read. The Quran does not present the meeting of Musa and Khidir as an isolated miracle or a historical curiosity. It presents it as a lens, a way of seeing reality without demanding control over it. This is where the story turns from something we listen to into something we carry. Every believer eventually stands where Musa stood, confronted by events that do not align with effort, morality, or expectation. Plans unravel. Loss arrives without warning. Doors close after years of patience, and the question rises naturally, sometimes painfully, where is the wisdom in this? The story does not silence that question. It redirects it. It teaches that not every question is answered by explanation, but some are answered by trust. The Quran never suggests that believers should stop striving for understanding or justice. Musa did not stop being Musa after this encounter. He did not withdraw from leadership or soften his stance against wrongdoing. What changed was not his mission, but his inner posture. He learned that obedience to Allah includes accepting that some dimensions of wisdom are intentionally withheld. This acceptance is not defeat. It is maturity of faith. It is the difference between a heart that demands control and a heart that submits with confidence. The believer is not asked to like hardship, but to recognize that hardship does not indicate abandonment. Silence from Allah is not absence. Delay is not denial. Hidden wisdom is not neglect. This lesson becomes especially powerful when viewed through the lens of everyday life. Most believers will never witness miracles or divine interventions that clearly explain themselves. Instead, they experience ordinary pain, quiet disappointment, unanswered prayers, and slow healing. The story of Musa and Khidir speaks directly to these moments. It tells the believer that the absence of clarity does not mean the absence of care. It tells them that Allah may be protecting them in ways that feel like loss, guiding them through paths that feel like detours, or preparing them for futures they cannot yet imagine. This does not remove grief, but it gives grief a place to rest without destroying faith. There is also a warning embedded in the story, subtle but firm. It warns against claiming insight into Allah's hidden plan. Khidir never claimed superiority. He never invited followers. He never taught publicly. He never stayed longer than necessary. His silence was as important as his actions. This is why Islamic scholars were so careful with this story. They understood its depth, but they also understood its danger if misused. Islam does not allow individuals to claim hidden knowledge to justify harm, break law, or elevate themselves above others. Any knowledge that contradicts the Quran and authentic Sunnah is not divine, no matter how spiritual it sounds. The story protects the believer by reminding them that guidance remains clear, accessible, and complete through revelation. At the same time, the story protects the believer from despair. It creates space for unanswered questions without turning them into accusations. It allows a person to say, "I do not understand this yet," without feeling that their faith is weak. Musa himself did not understand until the end, and even then, understanding came only partially. Some aspects of divine wisdom were still beyond him. That is not failure, that is humanity. Faith in Islam was never meant to eliminate mystery. It was meant to anchor the soul within it. As the narrative reaches its close, the Quran leaves us without closure in the way stories usually provide. There is no reunion, no further explanation, no continued dialogue. This absence is deliberate. The story ends the way life often does, with lessons incomplete and questions lingering. And yet, something feels settled. Not because everything is understood, but because trust has been reinforced. The believer is left with the certainty that Allah sees what they cannot, knows what they do not, and acts with a wisdom that never errs. This final realization reshapes the way success and failure are defined. Success is no longer measured only by outcomes, but by alignment with obedience. Failure is no longer defined solely by loss, but by distance from trust. The believer learns to walk forward without needing to see the entire path, confident that the one who designed the path is guiding every step. This is not blind faith. It is informed surrender, grounded in revelation and strengthened by reflection. The secret of ilm ladunni, then, is not that some people know more. It is that Allah knows everything, and that knowledge is enough. The believer is not meant to seek hidden wisdom, but to seek closeness to the one who possesses it. In that closeness, patience grows, judgment softens, gratitude deepens, and faith becomes resilient rather than fragile. The story ends, but its impact continues. Every time life contradicts expectation, every time goodness is met with hardship, every time the heart asks why, the memory of Musa walking behind Khidir quietly returns. Not to give answers, but to offer reassurance that there is order behind the chaos, mercy behind the loss, wisdom behind the silence, and a Lord who never acts without purpose, even when that purpose remains unseen. This is where the journey truly concludes, not with knowledge gained, but with trust renewed, not with clarity achieved, but with humility embraced. The believer does not walk away knowing more secrets of the unseen, but walking more firmly in the seen world, grounded in obedience, patience, and hope. And that, in the end, is the greatest gift this story offers.